In the mid-1970s, South African gunners in Angola were losing a range war they could not win with the weapons they had. Cuban and FAPLA batteries were firing Soviet Katyusha rockets that landed far beyond the reach of South Africa's old 5.5-inch howitzers, guns that traced their lineage back to the Second World War. Shells would fall on South African positions, and the South Africans could do nothing but dig deeper. A gun that cannot shoot back is not a gun. It is a target. The South African Defence Force needed range, and it needed it fast. The state arms company Armscor had been built for exactly this kind of emergency. South Africa was under a United Nations arms embargo because of apartheid, so nobody was going to sell Pretoria a finished howitzer off a shelf. Armscor would have to build one from scratch or find someone willing to break the rules. That someone was a Canadian ballistics genius named Gerald Bull. Bull was not a soldier or a spy. He was an engineer obsessed with one idea: how far can a shell fly before physics says no? In the 1960s, he had run Project HARP, a joint US-Canadian venture that tried to fire scientific payloads into the upper atmosphere using enormous smoothbore guns instead of rockets. It sounded absurd, and it worked well enough to set an altitude record that stood for decades, yet it never earned Bull the respect or funding he thought he deserved. Governments treated him as a curiosity. When HARP lost its backing in the early 1970s, Bull turned bitter toward the establishment that had shelved his life's work, and that bitterness would shape every decision he made afterward. He founded the Space Research Corporation as a private venture, determined to sell his knowledge to whoever valued it enough to pay. He had a design ready and no customer willing to fund it. South Africa had a desperate need and no gun. It was a perfect and perfectly illegal match. In 1977, Bull's people made contact with Armscor. He brought them his 155mm design, known as the GC-45, along with something even more valuable, a way to make ordinary shells fly farther. Bull had spent years perfecting a technique called extended-range full-bore ammunition, shells shaped like darts instead of blunt cylinders, which sliced through the air with far less drag. He paired that with a base bleed system, a small gas charge in the base of the shell that fills in the low-pressure pocket, dragging it backward mid-flight. Together, these tricks could push a 155mm shell out to nearly 40 kilometers, almost twice what most NATO guns of the era could manage. Armscor did not just buy Bull's blueprints and copy them. Engineers at Littleton Engineering Works took the GC-45 concept and rebuilt it around South African battlefield conditions. They gave it a hydraulic auxiliary power unit. This small diesel engine could lift the entire carriage off its wheels, swing it into firing position, and get rounds downrange in under 2 minutes. That same engine lets the gun crawl short distances under its own power without a tow vehicle, which is useful when you are dodging counter-battery fire in the bush. The result, tested and refined between 1977 and 1982, was the G5. The G5 entered service in 1982 and immediately changed how the border war was fought. For the first time, South African gunners could outrange their Cuban and Angolan opponents instead of absorbing their fire. During operations like Protea and Askari, G5 batteries pounded enemy positions from distances that made counter-battery response nearly impossible, and the gun's reputation grew fast enough that Armscor soon developed a self-propelled cousin, the G6 Rhino, which mounted the same barrel on an armored 6-wheeled hull so crews could fire and displace before enemy radar could triangulate them. Even Israel took notice, buying G5 systems and mounting them on old Centurion tank hulls to create a self-propelled variant used in Lebanon in 1986. Iraq bought hundreds of rounds too, eager for anything that could outshoot Iranian artillery in a war that was, by then, one of the bloodiest artillery contests since 1918. South Africa never owned the core idea outright. Bull did. He had built the G5 around his own privately held ballistics research, and Armscor's contribution, however substantial, sat on top of a foundation that legally still belonged to a Canadian arms dealer working out of Brussels. That distinction would matter enormously because Gerald Bull was not a man who believed in exclusive deals. He believed in whoever paid him next. And in the years right after the G5 entered service, 2 more customers came calling, one in Europe and one in Asia, both wanting the same technology South Africa thought it had made its own. By 1980, Gerald Bull had already moved on. South Africa had paid him well, but he was running a private company, not a charity, and Space Research Corporation needed new contracts to survive. Bull relocated his operations to Brussels, positioning himself at the center of the global arms trade, close enough to European buyers and far enough from any single government's oversight. In 1982, an Austrian firm called Naricum, a subsidiary of the steel giant voestalpine, purchased the design rights to the original GC-45 directly from Bull's company. This was not espionage in the cloak and dagger sense. It was a business transaction, legal on paper, dressed up as an ordinary licensing deal. Naricum's engineers took the GC-45 blueprints and reworked them for mass production, smoothing out manufacturing bottlenecks and adding options like improved fire control systems. The result was renamed the GH-45, a gun that looked and performed almost identically to South Africa's G5 because it descended from the same parent design. The first buyer was Thailand's Royal Marine Corps, an unremarkable, above-board sale. Then came the deal that turned Naricum into a national scandal. Iraq, locked in a brutal war of attrition with Iran, signed a contract worth roughly $300 million for 110 GH-45 howitzers along with 41,000 rounds of ammunition. Both Iran and Iraq were under a United Nations arms embargo at the time. Naricum shipped the guns anyway, routing them through Jordan to obscure their true destination, with false paperwork describing the cargo as agricultural equipment and other civilian goods. When Austrian investigators eventually pulled the thread in the mid-1980s, it unraveled into one of the largest arms smuggling scandals in post-war Austrian history. Neutral Austria had built its post-war identity partly on staying out of exactly this kind of conflict, and the revelation that a state-linked steel company had armed both sides of the Gulf War's deadliest artillery duels landed like a national betrayal. Executives went to prison, senior officials in the ruling party resigned under pressure, and the trials that followed dragged on for years, becoming one of the defining political corruption stories of Austria's Second Republic. Only around 100 more of these guns were eventually built under South African license and shipped onward under separate arrangements, a detail that shows how tangled the supply lines had already become. By the time the Gulf War arrived in 1991, GH-45 in Iraqi hands briefly worried coalition planners more than almost any other weapon in Saddam Hussein's arsenal, precisely because their range matched anything the coalition could bring to bear. In the end, most were destroyed on the ground by airstrikes and rocket artillery before they ever got the chance to prove that fear was justified. But for a few tense weeks, a howitzer descended from South African wartime engineering held Western military planners hostage to their own worst-case scenarios. Naricum did not steal anything from Armscor's factory floor. It bought a license from the same man Armscor had bought its own knowledge from. But the emotional sting for South Africa was real and well documented in South African defense circles. Pretoria had spent years and serious money turning Bull's raw concept into a combat-proven weapon, fighting a real war with it, refining its metallurgy and recoil systems under fire. Then watched nearly identical hardware appear in Austrian and Iraqi hands within a couple of years, built by a company that had contributed none of that battlefield testing. In an industry where reputation and exclusivity are currency, that felt like theft even where the law said license. Bull, for his part, seemed indifferent to loyalty. He was playing every side of a war-hungry decade simultaneously, and by the time the Naricum scandal broke, he was already deep into an even more consequential deal, this one with a country that had approached him years before Austria ever did. That country was the People's Republic of China, and its interest in Bull's technology went back to 1980, 2 years before Naricum even signed its contract. China's route to the 155mm gun was slower, quieter, and arguably more consequential than Austria's. In 1980, China's state-owned defense conglomerate Norinco, the North Industries Group Corporation, signed an engineering contract with Bull's Space Research Corporation. At the time, China's artillery was still overwhelmingly built around Soviet 152mm calibers, a legacy of the Sino-Soviet alliance of the 1950s that had long since curdled into rivalry. Beijing wanted something modern, something NATO standard, and something that would let its arms industry compete on the export market rather than just supply its own army with Cold War leftovers. Bull agreed to help, and he did not do it alone. He brought in the Spanish firm Santa Barbara, the same company he had used to manufacture ammunition for South Africa, to help fabricate prototype GC-45 barrels for Chinese testing. By 1983, Chinese engineers were field testing the design in the deserts of Baotou, in Inner Mongolia, well before most of the world understood how far the technology had already traveled. Norinco began series production shortly after, under the designation PLL-01, later exported under the name ASH-1. Separately, Bull also helped Norinco design an upgrade package for China's older Type 59 130mm howitzer, a Soviet pattern gun, rebuilding it around the same 155mm ballistics principles. That upgrade became known as the WA-021. China was not simply buying a finished product the way Thailand or Iraq had bought the GHN-45. It was buying access to the underlying engineering knowledge itself, at a moment when the West briefly needed China as a counterweight against the Soviet Union. After the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan in 1979, Washington and its allies grew far more willing to look the other way on technology transfers to Beijing, because Cold War arithmetic said any friend against Moscow was worth cultivating, even a communist one that had been an American adversary a decade earlier. It was a short, strange window in history, and Bull walked directly through it, and South Africa's hard-won battlefield knowledge walked through it with him, repackaged as a Chinese engineering contract with no acknowledgement of where the underlying concept had proven itself. There is a bitter irony sitting inside all of this. South Africa's own government was, at the very same time, one of the most isolated regimes on the planet, shunned by nearly every country doing business with Bull. Beijing could sign contracts with Bull's company openly enough to field test prototypes in Inner Mongolia by 1983, while Pretoria had to smuggle ammunition through Spain under false paperwork just to keep its own guns firing. The country that had actually proven the design's worth in combat was the one forced to operate in the shadows, while the country that arrived years later paid for engineering services rather than warfighting expertise, and never fired a shot in anger with the design got to build it in daylight. Was this theft in the strict legal sense? Almost certainly not, and any account that claims otherwise is oversimplifying a genuinely murky story for the sake of a cleaner headline. Bull owned the rights to his own ballistics research and was free, however unscrupulous it looks in hindsight, to sell that research to whoever wrote him a check. Nothing was smuggled out of an Armscor vault in the dead of night. But the practical effect on South Africa was the same as theft would have been. A weapon system Pretoria had bled to develop, tested in a real war under real fire, ended up equipping the artillery arm of one of the largest militaries on Earth, without South Africa receiving so much as a footnote of credit, let alone Norinco's factories in Harbin and Heilongjiang turned the PLL-01 and WA-021 into the backbone of China's modernized field artillery starting in 1987, and decades later, descendants of that same lineage were still being exported, including systems sold to Algeria. As late as 2014, there is a darker coda to this entire story, and it belongs to Gerald Bull himself. After the Narcom scandal broke, after years of selling the same technology to South Africa, Austria, China, and eventually working on an even more ambitious project for Iraq, a colossal long-range supergun called Project Babylon, Bull's luck ran out. On March 22, 1990, he was shot 5 times outside his Brussels apartment. No one was ever charged. Most intelligence historians believe Israel's Mossad killed him, worried that his supergun project would give Saddam Hussein the ability to fire chemical or even nuclear payloads at Israeli cities. Whether or not that theory is correct in every detail remains genuinely unresolved, but the broader lesson is not. Gerald Bull built one gun and, through sheer audacity and a total absence of loyalty, managed to arm South Africa, Austria, Iraq, Israel, Thailand, Singapore, and China with variations of the same underlying idea, all within a single decade. The G5 was never stolen in the way a thief slips through a window. It was something more unsettling. A piece of proven, battle-tested engineering that its own creator was free to sell again and again to anyone who could pay, regardless of who had bled to perfect it first.